If you've spent any time at all looking into FIRE, financial independence, retire early, you've definitely seen the standard playbook. Save like 50, maybe 70% of your income. Invest it all aggressively, low cost funds, you know the drill, hit that 4% rule, and bam, you're supposedly free. But just pause for a second. Ask yourself, how often do the faces you see in those typical success stories, the high earning, often young, maybe single tech folks, how often do they actually look like you? We all know the core ideas of FIRE, saving, investing, they're universal, right? But what happens when that starting line? Well, when it just isn't level for everyone. What happens when the actual rules of the financial game seem kind of stacked against you, even before you make that very first investment? That's really the big, complex question we're tackling in this deep dive. We're shifting the focus completely. We want to analyze the structural stuff, the wealth gaps that span generations, the lack of trust in the financial industry, those huge invisible burdens of caregiving, and yeah, even cultural obligations.
These things disproportionately impact women and minorities when they're trying to pursue financial independence.
It's such a necessary conversation because the standard Fire East story, it often just assumes this baseline level of, well, access, security, maybe generational money. That baseline just doesn't exist for huge parts of the population. It really doesn't. Our sources today, they include some really comprehensive studies, places like the Urban Institute, Howard University. Plus, we've got proprietary insights from financial firms, Think Fidelity, and some really powerful personal stories too. And together they paint this picture of these persistent structural hurdles. And these hurdles, they demand we stop thinking, financial education alone is the answer. We need to actually analyze the mechanics of how people get excluded.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to cut through all that surface level stuff. We want to pull out the crucial insights from this deep research and hopefully illuminate a path to FI that truly acknowledges these real-world systemic barriers. We want to make sure FIRE feels genuinely accessible for everyone. It's what we call Project FIRE Welcome. So welcome, you're joining us now for this deep dive.
Okay.
Let's start unpacking this. We really can't talk about strategies like FIRE, wealth building strategies, without first getting a handle on the sheer scale of the challenge, especially for women and minorities. We absolutely have to start with the racial wealth gap. And the sources are clear. It's way, way bigger and more deep-rooted than just the income gap.
Absolutely. That's like the foundational mistake in so much financial talk, mixing up income and wealth. Income, that's what you earn this year, right? Your salary, maybe a bonus. But wealth, that's the total pile. Assets minus liabilities. Wealth is the real engine. It drives long-term economic opportunity, security, and crucially for this conversation, the actual path to FIRE.
Right, because being able to save, say, 50% of your income, that relies on already having some kind of cushion, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's built on existing wealth. That buffer, it lets you handle a job loss without derailing everything. It lets you pay for education, maybe without massive debt, or make a big down payment on something that grows, like a house.
And the difference you mentioned between the income gap and the wealth gap, it's pretty shocking when you see the numbers.
It really is. Research from the Urban Institute confirms that the racial wealth gap is actually 3 times larger than the racial income gap. Let's put some concrete numbers on that, using their 2010 data just as an example. The average wealth for white families, around $632,000. Compare that to Black and Hispanic families, average wealth was about $103,000.
Wow, $632K versus $103K.
Yeah. But now look at income. The average income ratio between those same groups was only about 2 to 1.
Okay, so you might earn, say, half as much in salary, but you actually possess only 1/6 of the total economic cushion.
Precisely. And that 6 to 1 wealth ratio, it completely changes the FIRE conversation, doesn't it?
It has to. If FIRE assumes you can save a certain percentage based on disposable income, but your starting capital is 6 times smaller, well, it means the savings rate needed for families of color has to be incredibly, maybe impossibly higher just to even approach that standard 4% rule baseline. You're literally starting the race like 6 lengths behind.
Exactly. And what makes it worse, this gap isn't static. It doesn't just stay at 6 to 1. It actually grows over time. The Urban Institute looked at different age groups as they got older, and they found this clear lack of what they called a compound growth path for families of color.
Okay, tell us more about that widening. What does it look like across someone's working life?
Well, when people are in their 30s and 40s, those prime early saving years, white families already have about 3.5 to 4 times more wealth than families of color.
Which is already a huge gap.
A huge gap. But then fast forward to when those same people are in their 60s, what should be their peak wealth years, that gap explodes. It widens dramatically to 7 times more wealth for white families compared to Black families.
7 times. So nearly doubles from mid-career to retirement age. You mentioned that compound growth path. Mechanically, why does the gap actively expand like that? What's missing? What high-growth stuff aren't people getting access to that creates that multiplier effect?
Yeah, the main reason seems to be the lack of that initial capital needed to get into high growth, maybe high leverage assets in the first place. Families of color are just significantly less likely. Some data suggests up to 5 times less likely to get a big gift or an inheritance.
Okay.
And that means they miss out on the seed money for really critical wealth building tools.
Like what specifically?
Well, think about a big down payment for a house. Home equity, historically, that's been the single biggest wealth builder for the American middle class. If you don't have that inherited down payment, maybe you can't buy at all. Or you have to take out loans with worse interest rates, higher PMI, meaning more of your payment goes to debt, not equity.
Right. Less of your money is actually building wealth.
Exactly. And beyond housing, they might miss out on other avenues, things like private equity, venture capital, maybe even just maxing out retirement accounts really early in their career. They lose decades of that powerful tax advantage compounding effect.
So not having that initial seed money, that wealth transfer, that's the friction. It stops the automatic wealth building machine, like making your mortgage payment or your automatic 401k deposit, from really doing its job effectively.
Yeah.
It's like a systemic exclusion from compounding.
That's a perfect way to put it, systemic exclusion from the compound growth machine. And on top of that, this makes any wealth they do manage to build incredibly fragile. We saw exactly how economic shocks, like recessions, just disproportionately wipe out the wealth that has been accumulated.
Right. Let's use the Great Recession as a kind of case study in that fragility. It definitely didn't hit everyone the same way.
Not even close. Between, say, 2007 and 2010, that recession just blew existing disparities wide open. White families, their wealth dropped by about 11% on average, which is bad, obviously.
Yeah, still a significant hit.
But look at minority families. Hispanic families saw their wealth slashed by over 40%. Black families lost 31%.
30%, 31%. Compared to 11, that's like a 3 to 4 times greater loss rate.
Yeah.
What specific assets were hit hardest for these groups?
For Hispanic families, the biggest hit was home equity. It was basically cut in half, which fits with other data suggesting many were maybe pushed into predatory loans or bought homes near the market peak with very little equity, high loan-to-value ratios. So when prices tanked, their main, often only significant asset just evaporated.
Okay, so housing collapse hit them hardest. What about Black families?
For Black families, the biggest losses were actually in retirement assets. They saw a 35% drop there, on average.
Retirement funds, wow. That seems counterintuitive maybe. Why retirement funds?
It's a really critical finding. It points to a lack of other liquid savings, those cash buffers we talked about. Research shows lower-income families, when they face job loss or a major financial emergency, they're often forced to raid their retirement accounts because there's simply nowhere else to turn.
Ah, okay, so they're selling assets, likely stocks or mutual funds, when the market is down.
Exactly. They're forced sellers at the worst possible time. They have to lock in those losses just to pay the bills, which obviously pushes their FIRE timeline even further out. It devastates future compounding.
So while families with more wealth, more stability could just grit their teeth and wait for the market recovery, families with less stability were forced to basically eat their long-term growth assets just to survive the short term.
Precisely. It creates this vicious cycle of vulnerability. Every setback pushes FI further and further away, making it harder to ever catch up.
Okay, this brings us to a really interesting group. Let's shift gears and talk about people who, at least on paper, seem to have overcome that first big hurdle income. We're talking about high-income Black earners, people making, say, $100,000 a year or more. And this is where the barriers seem to shift away from just income and more towards this idea of a trust deficit, especially with the financial industry, which is fascinating, right? Because building serious wealth, the kind needed for FIRE, usually involves using financial tools, getting professional advice.
It absolutely does. But first, we need to put even that high income label in context. Yes, $100,000 is a significant income, but white households are still about twice as likely to be in that bracket, roughly 28% of white households compared to 14% of Black households.
So even reaching that level is less common to begin with.
Right. And second, even within that $100 K plus group, the disparities don't disappear. That Howard University study we mentioned, it found the mean income ratio between Black and white high earners was only 0.71.
0.71. What does that actually tell us?
It tells us that while both groups are technically high income, the white high earners in that category tend to skew much, much higher, often earning multiples above that $100,000 threshold, whereas black high earners are more clustered closer to that $100K minimum for the category. So the income gap persists, even at the top.
Got it. So even if you're a black high earner, you're still likely earning significantly less than your white peer in that same broad income band. Okay, so with that context, let's look at engagement with financial professionals. That's so key for optimizing savings, accelerating FIRE growth. What did the numbers show there?
Well, the quantitative data showed a pretty significant reluctance, especially initially. There was a 2015 Prudential survey cited in the Howard study. It found that 39% of black respondents said a financial professional had reached out to them.
Okay, so nearly 40% were contacted.
Right, but only 14% actually ended up working with one.
Only 14%. How does that compare to the general population?
For the general U.S. population, it was 46% reporting outreach and 26% actually engaging with an advisor.
Wow. So more than a quarter of the general population works with an advisor, but less than 1 in 7 black respondents do, even when the advisor makes the first move.
Exactly. That's a huge gap. Think about all the missed opportunities for optimizing investments, tax strategies, maximizing that compounding effect for FIRE.
Yeah, definitely. What did the study say was the main driver for deciding whether or not to get advice?
This was a really key finding, especially for thinking about solutions. The study confirmed that income level is the single biggest factor. The more income you have, the more likely you are to seek out and use professional financial advice.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. Higher stakes, more complex situation maybe.
Right. And it suggests, maybe indirectly, that policies aimed at closing those racial income gaps could actually be a powerful way to improve wealth building too. Because higher income seems to naturally lead people towards getting financial guidance.
But here's the really counterintuitive part, the bit that challenges that common idea that, if only people knew more about finance. Did education level or financial literacy scores make a difference in whether these high-income black individuals sought advice?
Amazingly, no. The research found that educational background and self-reported financial literacy had no significant impact on whether they sought or used professional advice.
No significant impact. So it's not about not knowing enough finance.
Apparently not, at least for this high-income group. Which strongly suggests the barrier isn't a lack of information, it points towards something deeper.
It has to be that trust issue we mentioned earlier, a crisis of trust. Because if you can't trust the advice you're getting or the person giving it, well, that's a perfect way to keep people excluded, right? Especially if you're already starting behind. If the very institutions meant to help you catch up and build wealth are viewed with suspicion, you're kind of stuck trying to figure out complex stuff all on your own.
And that suspicion, it's not irrational. It's deeply, deeply rooted in history. The qualitative parts of the study, the focus groups, they really highlighted this. There's a profound earned mistrust stemming from generations of black wealth being systematically suppressed, even actively destroyed.
We're talking about things beyond just, say, redlining.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just about exclusion. Researchers like Darity and Mullen talk about predatory inclusion. That means black individuals and communities weren't just ignored. They were actively targeted for exploitative financial products. Think sky-high payday loans, subprime mortgages, even when they qualified for better, insurance scams.
So the system wasn't just sidelining them. It was actively trying to extract whatever capital they managed to build up.
Exactly. Targeting them for profit extraction, not partnership and growth.
That history, wow, that legacy of being seen as like a mark for profit instead of a client to help grow,
Yeah.
that has to shape how you view a financial advisor today, even a well-meaning one.
It absolutely does. You could hear it in the focus groups. When participants talked about advisors now, the mistrust was palpable. Many explicitly used terms like salesman. They felt the advisors were primarily motivated by making money for themselves, not the client's well-being.
Were there specific complaints?
Yes. Lack of transparency around fees and compensation came up repeatedly, 5 specific mentions of that. People felt unsure how the advisor was actually getting paid, and there was huge dissatisfaction with generic cookie-cutter advice. Advisors recommending standard products that just didn't fit their specific goals or, interestingly, their investment style.
Investment style? Like,
Yeah, one high-income person put it really well. They said something like, I need to feel seen and heard. If you're just offering me products that don't work with my investment style, I'm going to have a problem.
yeah. They mentioned wanting advice on things like investing in art or optimizing specific tools for entrepreneurs like a solo Roth 401k, not just being told to buy the same mutual funds as everyone else.
Yeah.
Okay, so they want tailored, sophisticated advice, but they're deeply skeptical about whether they can trust the advisor to provide it without being self-interested. Given that skepticism, how did these high-income Black earners actually navigate this? How did they try to get the good advice they knew they needed for serious fire accumulation?
They basically developed this really robust, proactive strategy. They called it trust but verify.
Trust but verify. That phrase actually came up multiple times.
13 times, yeah. It was clearly a common, almost standardized approach for many of them. They described how they deliberately asked for financial reports before meetings, sometimes days in advance.
Yeah.
They'd review them, analyze them, and come prepared with very specific, detailed questions to essentially hold the advisor accountable.
Wow, that sounds like a huge amount of extra work. It's like you hire an expert so you don't have to be the expert, but the history forces you to become this kind of micromanager. Just make sure you're not getting ripped off or just getting lazy generic service. That extra time and energy, that's another tax on the fire journey itself.
It absolutely is a significant time and emotional tax. And it directly explains why their proposed solutions weren't about, better disclosure forms. They were about human connection and representation. Participants consistently said they wanted personalized, truly trustworthy relationships. They compared it to the kind of trust you'd place in a really good doctor or a highly recommended realtor.
And the representation piece.
Crucial. They explicitly expressed a desire for advisors who look like me and who understand how to build generational wealth for Black people. They recognize that their specific goal building wealth, not just for themselves, but to catch up for past generations, might need different strategies, a more holistic approach than the typical fire client might require.
Okay, the picture gets even more complex, the hurdles even higher, when we specifically look at the intersection of race and gender. When we center the experience of Black women, we see what's often called the double gap. The economic realities here make achieving FI seem less like a challenge and more like climbing an incredibly steep mountain.
Yeah, we really have to understand the cumulative impact here. The lifetime earnings data alone is just sobering. Black women's average lifetime earnings, about $1.3 million.
Okay, 1.3 million over a lifetime. How does that compare?
It's less than half of what white men earn over their lifetimes. That's $2.7 million. And critically, it's also lower than white women, who average $1.5 million, and even lower than Black men at $1.8 million.
Just less than half of white men and below both white women and Black men. That deficit starts right away with the wage gap, right?
Yeah.
Makes saving aggressively from the get-go much harder.
Exactly. That famous pay gap figure in 2021, Black women earned about 63 cents for every dollar a comparable white man earned. But it's not just lower pay. The potential to save is further squeezed because Black women are far more likely to be the sole head of their household.
Right, you mentioned that earlier.
60%. That's the highest share of any racial or ethnic group. Being the sole breadwinner drastically limits how much income can possibly be allocated to long-term wealth building like fire. Every dollar is often needed just for immediate family survival and stability.
And on top of lower earnings and higher household responsibility, there's the cost of entry into professional careers. The student debt burden is huge for Black women.
This is such a critical piece that often gets glossed over. Black women carry the highest average student debt load in the U.S. The numbers are stark. Average undergrad debt is $38,800. Average grad school debt, $58,252.
Wow. Highest debt load.
Highest debt load. They're taking on these massive loans to get the education needed to compete, but that investment doesn't always pay off equally in terms of income. Get this statistic, it's deeply troubling. Black women with college degrees often earn income similar to white men who only have a high school degree.
Wait, say that again. College-educated Black women earning like high school-educated white men.
That's what the data suggests. They take on the highest debt, get the degree, but then face the combined wage penalties of both race and gender, severely diminishing the income return on that expensive educational investment.
Okay, so you combine historical disadvantage, lower lifetime earnings, the highest student debt, often being the sole provider. It's completely understandable that this would lead to a crisis of financial confidence. And confidence, or lack thereof, is a huge psychological barrier to making the kind of bold investment moves that fire often requires.
Absolutely. Fidelity did some really interesting research specifically on women's financial independence, and it highlights this confidence deficit clearly. Overall, women are just much less likely to feel financially comfortable. About 1 in 6 women reported struggling with their current finances, compared to only 1 in 10 men.
1 in 6 versus 1 in 10.
And the measurable confidence gap around financial knowledge is stark. Fewer than half of women feel knowledgeable about financial matters. For men, it's 2 out of 3.
Less than 50% versus over 66%.
Right. And that lack of confidence directly impacts their comfort level with making big investment decisions, or even feeling sure about making the right choices for their retirement contributions. If you don't trust your own judgment, you're naturally going to lean towards safer, lower return options, maybe keeping too much in cash, which slows down wealth growth significantly.
And there's an emotional cost to this financial insecurity that came through in the data. You mentioned it earlier, this feeling of being trapped. That seems incredibly powerful.
It is. It really highlights the difference between FIRE being about, say, lifestyle optimization versus being about fundamental freedom and safety. The data showed 1 in 3 women felt they didn't have enough savings to make major life changes. Things like switching jobs, moving, or, critically, leaving a bad or unsafe relationship.
1 in 3 women felt trapped like that, compared to men.
Compared to 1 in 5 men?
Wow. 1 in 3 versus 1 in 5. That single data point just reframes the entire purpose of FI for so many women. It's not just about quitting work early to travel. It's about having the basic autonomy, the leverage to escape harmful situations. It's a tool for personal safety, for agency.
Exactly. And you see that reflected in how women themselves often define FI. When asked, 75% define it primarily as having enough personal income so you don't have to rely on financial support from anyone else.
Yeah.
It's about self-sufficiency, independence in the truest sense.
It's about not being dependent.
Not being dependent, and the resilience required to pursue this under difficult circumstances is just incredible. We saw one narrative, a 37-year-old single mother. She went through a tough divorce. Her ex actually emptied their daughter's college fund. Just devastating.
Oh my God.
But despite that, she rebuilt. She achieved a high income, $270,000. She managed to accumulate $1.3 million in investments, and she was close to paying off her house.
From that starting point, that's phenomenal.
Phenomenal. That level of success, rebuilding from scratch while shouldering the entire family load, it just shows that for many women, especially Black women facing these hurdles, FI isn't some casual hobby. It's a necessity they have to forge, often through incredible adversity.
Yeah, it perfectly illustrates the kind of grit needed when your starting line is way back and then someone actively tries to sabotage your progress. And thinking about that woman, that single mother,
Yeah.
it leads us right into this concept of the invisible load, the stuff standard FIRE calculations just completely ignore. Hashtag 5E, mid-roll project FIRE check-in.
Yeah, exactly. And before we really dig into those heavy time and energy taxes that just don't show up on a spreadsheet, we did want to just pause for a second and connect with you, our listeners.
If what we're talking about, this deep dive into the structural barriers, the need to tailor FIRE strategies, the importance of these different perspectives, if that's resonating with you, then you really get what Project FIRE is all about. We're here to bring that depth, that necessary nuance to the whole financial independence conversation. We want to make sure we're speaking to everyone who's part of or wants to be part of this movement.
And we really want these crucial conversations to reach more people, the folks who need this perspective, who maybe feel unseen by the more typical FIRE content out there. So if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, please take just a second, hit that like button, maybe share this deep dive with someone you know who might benefit from hearing this, and definitely subscribe to Project FIRE if you haven't already. Clicking that notification bell helps too. Your engagement, honestly, it's how we keep broadening this conversation and bringing you more deep dives like this one.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks for that. Let's get back to the sources now and really unpack these invisible loads, the non-financial demands that act like a hidden tax on the time and energy you need for that aggressive FI saving and investing.
Okay, the invisible load. When we talk about this, we mean all those non-financial demands, the drains on your time, your energy, your focus, that traditional FIRE planning just doesn't account for. Because, FIRE math is usually just about dollars and percentages. But life is way more complicated. And these loads, they fall much harder, disproportionately so, on women and minorities.
We often hear about the motherhood penalty in terms of lost wages when women take time off, but the sources suggest it's deeper, like it's baked into U.S. work policies themselves.
Yeah, the whole system seems designed around this idea of the ideal worker. Someone who starts a career at 22, works completely uninterrupted until 65, no breaks, no major life events interfering.
Which is not reality for most people, especially women.
Exactly. It ignores biology, it ignores societal expectations around caregiving, and so it structurally penalizes women. Take Black mothers. They actually have the highest labor force participation rate among all mothers, 76% back in 2020.
So they're working more than other mothers.
Working more, yes. But at the same time, they face higher unemployment rates and more disruption to their work, often because of the high cost or sheer lack of available, reliable childcare. And the burden isn't just childcare. It extends heavily into elder care, too. The average age for Black caregivers looking after older adults is around 44.
44, so right in the middle of their peak earning years.
Exactly. They're often sandwiched, caring for young kids and aging parents or relatives simultaneously. Smack dab in the years they should be aggressively saving and compounding for retirement. And it's not just a time drain, it's a direct financial drain. 35% of these Black caregivers report significant financial strain from it. On average, they spend about $6,774 out of their own pocket each year on caregiving-related expenses.
Almost $7,000 a year. That's not discretionary spending, is it? That's like a mandatory life tax for them. In a standard FIRE plan, that $6,700 would be going straight into investments, compounding year after year. But here, it's just gone. An unavoidable outflow.
Completely unavoidable. And the long-term cost, it's astronomical. The data shows women who leave the workforce entirely for caregiving, even for a few years, lose on average $131,000 just in Social Security benefits over their lifetime because of those reduced earning years.
Just from Social Security.
Wow, just Social Security. If you add in the lost wages themselves, and crucially, the lost investment compounding on those wages, the total financial hit is way, way bigger.
So that $131,000 loss in guaranteed inflation-adjusted retirement income, it means the FIRE portfolio needed for women, especially caregivers, has to be substantially larger, maybe hundreds of thousands larger, just to make up for that structural gap in their baseline retirement security. And that's before we even factor in that women tend to live longer.
Exactly. It's the structural penalty laid bare in hard numbers.
And beyond direct caregiving, the sources also talked about cultural and family obligations acting as another kind of invisible load, right? Things that cause financial sacrifices and directly slow down the FIRE journey.
Yes, absolutely. This came up strongly, especially for first-generation affluent individuals. In the focus groups with high-income Black earners, it was sometimes called the Black tax. This feeling, or often explicit expectation, that you have to provide significant ongoing financial support to parents, siblings, extended family members who didn't have the same economic opportunities.
Right. That fundamentally changes the basic FIRE math, doesn't it? It's not just income minus my expenses equals savings rate. It becomes income minus my expenses plus this family support tax plus that caregiving penalty equals, well, probably a much lower savings rate.
A much lower rate. And we see the same principle, maybe even more formalized in other cultures, too. The sources mentioned the Filipino cultural commitment of para sa pamilya.
Para sa pamilya, what does that mean exactly?
It basically means everything is for the family. It's this deep cultural value that leads to very real financial sacrifices. Things like delaying your own retirement savings so you can send money, remittances back home to family, or taking on a second job specifically to cover a relative's emergency. Maybe even using high-interest credit cards to bridge a gap for family needs, which directly hurts your own financial health. The source called it an invisible load that's carried, often quietly, constantly, undermining personal savings goals.
So given these deep obligations, both caregiving and cultural, it makes sense that for many high-income Black earners, the very definition of wealth has to shift. It can't just be about personal accumulation for early retirement, can it? It seems tied to community, to fixing past wrongs.
Absolutely. That came through so clearly in the focus groups. For them, wealth was fundamentally about intergenerational accumulation. It was about addressing that historical disadvantage head-on. One person literally said they feel many generations behind in creating wealth for our families.
Yeah.
So building wealth to pass on, to lift the next generation, becomes a huge priority, maybe even more important than retiring super early themselves.
A shift from purely personal FI to generational FI.
Exactly. And related to that, wealth was also strongly connected to the broader community. People talked about wanting to build a legacy not just for their kids, but for the larger Black community, using their success to advocate for policies that close the wealth gap, creating platforms or opportunities for others. The FI goal becomes more collective, more altruistic.
And there was one other piece to this redefinition of wealth that seemed really vital, the connection to health.
Yes, that was crucial. Several people emphasized that physical and mental health are absolutely essential parts of true wealth. They linked it back to history, saying things like, Chronic financial hardship resulting from centuries of exploitation is the primary driver of racial health disparities.
Wow. So the financial stress itself is seen as a direct cause of health problems.
Right. When you're constantly under financial strain, that systemic stress takes a physical and mental toll. So achieving FI, achieving that financial security, isn't just about the money. It's seen as a direct way to improve fundamental well-being, health, and longevity for themselves and their families. It's wealth in the holistic sense. Hashtag SPCC, strategies for empowerment and sustainability.
Okay, if you're taking all of this and the massive wealth gaps, the trust issues, the double gap for women, these huge invisible loads,
Yeah.
what does it actually mean for someone trying to navigate all this? How do you build a fire plan that's robust, sustainable, and actually acknowledges these complex realities?
Yeah.
We need to look beyond just save more, spend less. We need strategies addressing policy, psychology, the whole picture.
We really do. And the first thing to remember is what the data showed. Financial literacy alone isn't the magic bullet. It didn't significantly change engagement with advisors or close wage gaps. So we absolutely need structural solutions. And that often starts with policy frameworks that are designed to recognize and address these disparities directly.
The Urban Institute mentioned one approach called targeted universalism. That sounds like a really useful concept for listeners to grasp, especially if we're thinking about leveling that playing field for fire.
It's a brilliant concept, really. Targeted universalism basically says set a universal goal for everyone, like, say, achieving baseline financial security for retirement.
Okay, a goal everyone shares.
Right. But then you tailor the specific strategies and support mechanisms needed to help different groups reach that universal goal, recognizing they start from different places and face different barriers. And crucially, the tailored approach is often designed to give the biggest boost to the most marginalized groups first, even if the overall policy applies broadly.
Can you give us an example? How did that student loan forgiveness plan illustrate this? How did it specifically help Black women accelerate towards FI?
Sure. So the 2022 Student Loan Forgiveness Plan, remember, offered universal relief up to $10,000 for many borrowers meeting income criteria. That was the universal part.
Right.
But the targeted element was the extra relief provided specifically for recipients of Pell Grants during college.
Okay, and Pell Grants disproportionately go to lower-income students, often students of color.
Exactly. Black students, and particularly Black women, are much more likely to have received Pell Grants. So that additional relief targeted them specifically even within the universal program. And the impact on their potential FI path was significant and immediate. While white borrowers might have received a slightly higher average dollar amount forgiven overall, the Pell Grant targeting meant a much higher percentage of Black borrowers had their entire student debt wiped out.
Okay, complete erasure.
Complete erasure for 33% of Black borrowers, compared to 29% of white borrowers. Wiping out that debt instantly frees up cash flow. Money that was going to loans can now go directly into savings and investments, significantly accelerating their ability to reach FI.
That's a perfect illustration. A universal goal, but a targeted mechanism that provides an equitable boost where it's needed most.
Okay, so that's policy.
Moving to personal strategy, you mentioned we also need to maybe redefine FIRE itself, especially for women facing longer lifespans and that Social Security penalty. Make it more flexible.
Absolutely. That traditional 4% rule, it's the bedrock of FIRE math, but it needs a serious asterisk, especially for women. Because women live longer on average, relying on a 4% withdrawal rate might be too aggressive. Their nest egg needs to last potentially 5-10 years longer.
So they might need a bigger nest egg or a lower withdrawal rate.
Exactly. Maybe aiming for a 3.5% or even a 3% withdrawal rate provides a much safer margin for that longer lifespan. It requires more robust, more conservative planning up front.
And what about the retire early part? Does that need rethinking too?
Definitely. For many women, especially those juggling caregiving responsibilities, retire early doesn't necessarily mean stopping work completely at 45. It often means achieving the financial freedom to have choice and flexibility.
Choice and flexibility, like different flavors of FIRE.
Precisely. Concepts like barista FIRE become really relevant. That's where you save enough that your investments cover most of your needs, but you work part-time, maybe doing something you enjoy, primarily for benefits like health insurance and a bit of spending money.
Okay. Takes the pressure off needing huge investment returns.
Right. Or coast FIRE. That's where you save aggressively early on, hitting a number where your investments can likely just grow or coast on their own until traditional retirement age, even if you stop contributing actively. These approaches give women the freedom to maybe downshift careers, work part-time, or even take a few years off for caregiving without completely derailing their long-term financial security.
That flexibility seems key. It allows you to kind of absorb those inevitable life shocks, those caregiving needs, without feeling like your entire fire plan is destroyed if you have to step back for a while.
Exactly. It builds resilience into the plan, acknowledging that life isn't a straight line, especially when you're carrying those invisible loads.
Okay, so flexible fire goals. What about interacting with the financial system itself? We talked about the trust deficit for high-income Black earners. What were the strategies suggested for advisors or for individuals seeking trustworthy advice?
The absolute number one takeaway for advisors wanting to engage high-income Black clients, or really any client facing trust barriers, was transparency. Radical transparency. Be completely upfront about how you're compensated. Explain fees clearly. Eliminate any perception that you're just a salesman. And focus relentlessly on demonstrating personalized value, proving you understand their specific situation and goals, not just defending the cost of your service.
Makes sense. Build trust by being trustworthy. What about that idea of tackling the burning issue first?
Yes, that came from the Fidelity Emma Avenim's insights, particularly regarding engaging women who might have lower financial confidence initially. Often, someone seeks financial advice because they have one specific urgent problem nagging at them. Maybe it's overwhelming credit card debt, or they need to consolidate old 401ks, or figure out college savings for their kids.
That one thing keeping them up at night.
Exactly. The advice is focus laser-like on solving that specific problem first. Deliver a clear win for the client on their most pressing issue. That immediate success builds huge confidence both in the advisor and in the client's own ability to handle finances. It earns the advisor the right to then engage on broader, more complex fire planning.
So solve the immediate pain point, build trust and confidence, then expand.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to keep that momentum going, especially for clients who start with lower self-belief, what the research called lower personal agency advisors need a specific psychological framework. It involves 3 key steps.
Okay, this sounds really practical. What are the 3 steps? Useful for advisors, but also maybe for listeners trying to build their own financial confidence.
Totally. First, set an easy, achievable goal first. Don't start with save $1 million. Start with something small, concrete, and quickly achievable, like fully pay off one specific credit card this month, or automate a $50 transfer to savings each week. Get that quick win. Success breeds confidence.
Okay, small, quick win, step 1.
Second, track progress relentlessly and visually. Seeing the needle move, watching that debt go down or savings go up, even by small amounts, reinforces the positive behavior. It creates a virtuous cycle, hey, I can do this, which builds momentum for tackling bigger goals.
Makes sense. See the proof. Step 2, what's third?
Third, communicate regularly. This is vital for the advisor-client relationship, especially when trust is fragile. Regular check-ins, updates, even just sharing relevant articles. It reduces that feeling of information asymmetry. It also helps counter all the negative noise we hear in the media about market crashes or economic doom, which can easily derail someone's long-term plan if they panic. The goal is to make the client feel like an active partner, always in control, co-creating their financial future, not just being told what to do, empowering them through the process. #7, conclusion and provocative thought.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really hammered home that the path to financial independence is shaped by so much more than just spreadsheets and stock market returns. We've confirmed that racial wealth gap is just enormous, it's structural, and it actually gets worse over a lifetime. We saw that even for high-income Black earners, that legacy of mistrust creates huge barriers, demanding exceptional transparency and truly personalized financial advice.
Absolutely. And we really illuminated those unique compounded challenges faced by Black women, that debilitating double gap in both income and wealth, plus that massive invisible load of caregiving and cultural responsibilities that acts like a constant heavy tax on their ability to save and invest. It reinforces that financial growth, sustainable fire. It's most achievable when our policies, our planning, our whole approach actively addresses these deep foundational race and gender disparities. Just preaching financial literacy. It's necessary, sure, but it's nowhere near sufficient to fix these structural problems.
Yeah. It feels like for so many women and minorities, the whole pursuit of FI isn't just about early retirement. It's fundamentally a fight for agency, for autonomy, for that generational opportunity that wealth represents. It's about building a legacy, often driven by sheer necessity, creating a better future, not just for themselves, but for their families, their communities.
And as we saw throughout the data, Income really is that pivotal factor. It's what unlocks the door to the professional tools, the advice, the investment opportunities needed to really accelerate wealth building for FIRE. Which brings us to a final provocative thought we want to leave you with today. Consider this. If having more high-earning women, more high-earning minorities, visible and influential, actually helps push financial institutions, helps push policymakers to evolve, to finally meet their specific needs, to build that trust, to make the system more inclusive simply because they have to cater to this growing market, then how does your personal journey towards FI, your success, become more than just personal? How does it become an engine, maybe even unintentionally at first, for broader systemic change for all the people coming up behind you?
Yeah, think about that. We spent this whole deep dive analyzing the historical and structural taxes on wealth building for these groups. Now flip it. How does your financial success, the freedom, the influence, the power you gain through achieving FI, how does that translate into action? Into advocacy, maybe, demanding transparency, intentionally creating space and opportunity for others who've been shut out by the traditional system. If FI gives you back time and resources, what structural barrier will you choose to help tear down with them? That feels like the real enduring measure of what Project Fire Welcome is all about.